Okay, welcome all. I see it's the hour has turned, whatever your hour may be. I am actually in the central time zone, so I've gone from being in the morning to the afternoon now. I'm sure you're used to that living in California with people transitioning before you're ready for it. Um, my name is Tom Hames. I am a teacher, an entrepreneur, and a technologist, I guess is the short version of what I call myself. My vision of what I do in the world and what I've been doing for a long time is helping humans um, or help adapting technology to humans, not humans adapting to technology, but helping technology adapt to humans and making that transition as uh, I don't want to use the word painless, but and make that transition as seamless as possible so that you can get done what you need to get done in a more powerful way. And that's really, in a nutshell, what I do. And I always do this. I also do this with my students, and I know that as well as helping faculty. And I've been doing this for quite some time, as far as that part of thing is concerned. Um, and so, at any point, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I may not answer them immediately if I'm in the middle of something, but I will definitely circle back around. Um, I want this to be a somewhat interactive session, so it's not just me preaching from the mount as far as what I'm talking about. Please be and there again there will be some interactive sections to this as well. So okay, so with that in mind, still letting some stragglers in here. Starting to feel a lot like one of my classes. Um, Let me share my screen over to the deck, and I'll be flipping in and out of this deck um, as we go through the conversation. Let me make sure I got everything going here. Share and this here. Make sure I can see everything. I wish Zoom would automatically pop up the participant and the chat as I'm uh, when I share screen, but for some reason it decides not to. Um, and I'll give you my contact information at the end of the presentation, including how to find me on LinkedIn as well as just on the web in general. I'm still, well, I've kind of been in social media limbo for a little while, and I'm still working on that presence. Although I do have a presence, I don't get there as much as I want to. So lots of balls in the air. Okay, so today I want to talk a little bit about how AI is changing what we're doing, and specifically, I know this is an assessment conference, and so specifically around the issue of assessment. But I don't think you can divorce assessment with the larger mission of teaching and learning. I think, and that's certainly a part of what I'm trying to achieve in this talk is to sort of pull all that back together again, as well as thinking about technology as a concept. So, um, first of all, I want to make it clear, and I hear these conversations, and I'm in a lot of groups that talk about this sort of thing, of this idea of somehow stuffing the genie back in the bottle when it comes to AI. It's just not going to happen. I mean, the reality is that we have to adapt to the realities of the technology in the terms of our systems, and we need to use that as a way of reflecting backwards on what we're actually doing, or more importantly, how we're actually doing things, and why we're doing things the way that we're doing them. And so, we are operating in an environment, as I say, I like to say, education is a factory. We produce graduates in the same way that a car plant produces cars, and that's no accident. I mean, that's the way the system was designed to function after a certain point. It evolved into that, but that's essentially, we don't like to think of it in those terms, but the rest of the world thinks of it in those terms in the context of, we give out degrees, and that's the product. And the reality is that we're still stuck in that mindset. We really haven't adapted to the digital era It's not a this is not a new conversation. This is a conversation I've been having for over 20 years now. And it shifts in form, but what happens is we end up talking more and more about legitimacy and cheating. And this is just a way of protecting the structures of education without really thinking deeply about the structures of learning, of teaching and learning. Um, and that's a mistake, and that's always going to be a mistake. And when you start spending more effort defending the system than you do defending making your students better, then that it's already become hollowed out at that point. And I've written extensively about this, but I wrote a piece last year about, when students are cheating, who are they actually cheating? In many cases, they're cheating a system that doesn't really serve them. Um, and okay, so I will give you guys the link. I don't know if the link comes in the invite or not, but I will drop that in there. This is for a little later on in the talk. I just wanted to get the invites out of the way, so I wasn't doing that while I was trying to maintain your attention span. So, because I do want to show you around this tool for a lot of reasons, but we'll come back to that. Okay, so and if you haven't gotten it yet, I can try to resend it if we get once we get there. Okay. Um, Let me see, Linda. Yeah, it should have gone out. Okay. Let me double check. Yeah, they went out. Okay. So one other thing is that the digital age, in my mind, and things we like to talk about in terms of what we're trying to teach our students to be able to do is for them to be creative or critical thinkers. But in reality, many of the systems that we used to do it with emphasize conformity. And again, that gets back to that factory model. You do not want all of those Fords looking differently. You want everybody, you can have any color as long as it's black. Uh, and that model still persists in most areas of the education world, and that has to do with the system. I'm not blaming a lot of instructors, a lot of professors, teachers. They are fighting really hard against this, but there's an awful lot of learned helplessness out there as well. I did a talk last year, which, if you want to see sort of the bones of that, which I called the disconnect, and this idea that over time, technology has evolved, but there was a point in the 1960s, 70s where you started to have this, certainly by the 1980s, but where you started to have this split between the way our educational systems worked. In many cases, the technology that permitted the existence of mass education hit that point in the 1940s and 50s, 60s when we started having mainframe computers, but they're just an evolution of a system that starts all the way back with a blackboard. I'm not going to go through this whole process again, but I'm happy to talk about it, of course. And uh, uh, if if you want to see that again, the link is up there as well, and I can also share that as well. Um, but what we started seeing in emerging in the 1970s is we started seeing a democratization of technology in even more so than an acceleration of that democratization of technology. We started giving everybody computers. And for those of you old enough, remember all the debates about whether or not somebody should have a little computer called a calculator in a math class and so on. And these are still conversations that happen to this day. The internet gives us access to a wide range of technologies. Web 2.0 allows us to create in ways that were very difficult to pull off before um, before before we had it. You needed to be a professional to be able to create and share stuff. And that's the point, by the way, where I think this whole cheating thing suddenly took off, because suddenly everybody could create and, more importantly, share boring and repetitive test banks, papers, et cetera, that the students, of course, are going to take advantage of. And I think we spend an awful lot of time trying to close the gate on that, and it doesn't work. It's a losing battle over time, and AI has only made that worse. It's only democratized that more. And so now instead of paying someone to write a paper for me in Eastern Europe or wherever, now I can just have the AI do it, and it doesn't cost me hardly anything, if at all. And so, you know, that's a ongoing evolution. So, and that's again something we can't really change. So, how does AI um, change this equation? So, first of all, we test off a lot about for the purposes of getting answers. Um, in its most basic form, we're talking multiple choice tests and things like that, but everything up to and including papers. Um, the question is, were these things ever really that effective analogies for the real world? Did they actually work very effectively? There's a lot of data that says they didn't. Um, but but AI sort of exposes well, Google exposed the multiple choice test. AI exposes the faults of low level writing. And that is going to, that's something we're going to have to adapt to. It's something a process I'm going to describe today as something that affected my own assignments, or one of my own assignments in particular. And so this is the way in which, yet another democratization. We're giving more and more people access to very powerful tools, which in my mind is a good thing. We want these are tools that could help us build equity. And at the same time, we have to refocus our efforts. If we really believe in this idea that education drives equity, we've got to refocus our efforts to utilize these tools to their maximum benefit. The other thing AI does, of course, and what I'm sort of going at here is that, if we look at Bloom's taxonomy, which, this is the version that a good friend of mine, Ruben Pontedera, uses, um, that is a modified version of it that came out in the early 2000s. But these higher level skills, AI um, is going to prioritize people who can do that. The number of people who will be able to get by with remembering and understanding is going to continue to decline because we have, my computer remembers things a hell of a lot better than I do. And we have to remember that, the reason we build tools in the first place is to augment ourselves. And that's kind of a constant theme here, I think. But if we talk about AI as a way of augmenting ourselves as opposed to replacing ourselves, then maybe we can push our students into those higher level cognitive processes of, creating, evaluating, analyzing, applying the knowledge that is out there. And then they're going to retain some of that as well. But, that should not be the priority necessarily. Um, I always challenge people, think about, when you were an undergraduate, particularly, but even grad school, I would say, what do you actually remember from the material? What did you get out of that? And most people I talk to, even professional, scholars and PhDs, et cetera, have very little memory of, there's some things here and there. There's a few points here and there, but in terms of what did you learn in this class, in 1990 something in undergrad, good luck with that. So but there's definitely things that are evergreen here in terms of, as we think about this process of teaching and learning, of pedagogy, is, they're still human beings, and we still have to obey certain realities when it comes to how we learn stuff. And so the other watchword I would suggest that you think about a little bit is Vygotsky zones of proximal development. Um, and how we currently think about those things, and also most importantly, how our students currently think about how they learn, um, and what kinds of things the system discourages them from doing. So, most students, to be honest, and as someone who's been teaching for over 20 years, um, will go into the yellow zone, what I can do with help. But they're not going to risk their grade to go into what I can't do. And unfortunately, that is something where, we've trained them to do certain things. And unfortunately, uh, uh, the realities of getting to those higher levels of bloom are going to require people to go into the red zone quite a bit. And that's not just our students, but that's also us. We also have to remember we're always learners. So let me talk a little bit about my own class and how it's set up because it is unusual. My class is a design process. I teach government, but I teach it as a design process. I ask my students over the course of the semester to identify something that's meaningful to them, that's in society. I have some limits on that, but usually I can find something. We spend some time navigating our way around that, which by the way, AI can help with that. Um, and then I ask them to define that problem, to actually think about what's causing the issue. Like, I can't get health care. My mother's sick, or my, I can't afford to go to the doctor. Okay, well, let's figure out what that really looks like to larger society, not just to you. And then I ask them to go out and look for solutions that have been attempted by, in the case of my Texas class, I look at solutions that have been attempted by other states and analyze whether or not they work or not. And then I ask them to analyze how to get something through the process of government in Texas or the United States. How do you actually make something happen? Um, which, by the way, these days that part of it's gotten to be really interesting. But that's a whole other conversation. But in the course of doing this, what I'm trying to get them to do also is to develop important skills because I'm under no illusions. These guys are not going to go become political scientists. They're not going to go run for Congress. My class at the end of the day, and the reason that it's a required course, or the courses that I teach are required courses in Texas, is because we're trying to teach people how to be citizens at the end of the day. Understand enough about the way the democratic processes work in order to be able to do exactly what I'm asking them to do in class in terms of my schools are horrible. How do I fix that? How do I get police protection in my area? How do I fix the roads? Those kind of questions. I mean, these are real world, everyday questions, and the reality is government is everywhere. So, as part of this whole process, I'm trying to get them to do communication skills, and not just take things straight off a book, synthesizing those things and thinking about them. And I'll take you through that process here in a minute. I'm also asking them to do problem solving skills to try to understand. Okay, we've defined a problem. Now, what do we do with it? One of the things, by the way, that my students really struggle with is problem definition, because they're so used to have been given problems uh, all the way through their academic careers and told to solve them, but no one ever asks them to define the problem. Here's what's going on. What's actually the problem here? That's something that, honestly, they have a lot of trouble with. But if you can't do that, you don't have problem solving skills. Iterative learning, which is something that I've been emphasizing ever since the beginning, in a sense, and the digital world very much helps me do that. Learn how to learn from failure. This is another skill that I think students really struggle with. But you have to be able to analyze what's going on, not only with your own work, but with other people's works, but also evaluate your own work. And then how do you create from that? How do you learn from your mistakes? Because we don't learn from our successes, we learn from our mistakes. But we have an educational system that punishes, can't speak English now all of a sudden, that punishes failure. And then also, how do you use technological tools to achieve your goals in ways that weren't possible when I was an undergraduate? I didn't have the internet. Well, I mean, it did, but not in the way that it existed today. How do you use the computing resources, the creation technologies that Web 2.0 offers, and other things and how do I use AI now to get something to build something that I couldn't build before? How can I empower myself as a citizen? So this class, as I said, is a design process. Basically, the way this works in practice is there are three blogs over the course of the semester. They have to write about, first of all, again, define the problem. The second blog is find, again, attempted solutions and analyze whether or not they worked. And then finally, the third blog is how do I navigate this through one part of the political system. And then for the final portfolio, they have to tack on a larger strategy of adding another couple of parts of the political system to figure out, okay, how do I use interest groups in combination with the legislature? How do I understand interest groups so that I can exert influence on the legislature to get my bill passed, that sort of thing. Now, what I've already started to do a little bit in terms of dipping my toe into this process, first of all, I have used AI in terms of brainstorming what they're doing in the first place. That helps a lot. It greases the skids. It speeds up that process. It's been a real kind of, it's kind of a feeling through process the first few days of class where I'm, asking them, okay, well, what are you interested in? Okay, well, let's think about what that actually means for larger society, and then work our way to a point where they've got a workable challenge that they can explore throughout the course of the semester. But the other thing I started to do in a more formal sense is that my sources assignment asks them to go out and find sources. This is due before the blog. And one of the challenges is getting them to actually understand what the question is about, like the problem thing I mentioned a minute ago, getting them to understand how to define a problem. When I ask you, what's the problem? A lot of people jump to solutions. Well, the problem is we don't have a national healthcare system. No, it's not. The problem is that we have expensive healthcare. We have a lot of people who don't have access to healthcare, and we kill thousands of people every year because they don't have access to healthcare. Those are problems. National healthcare system might be one solution to that, but it's not the only solution. So what I've been doing is in the sources part, instead of just having them go out and find random sources, I first go through a live in-class exercise where I ask them to uh, feed what they think the question is in their particular challenge area into an AI, and we've been using primarily ChatGPT for this, um, and then copy and paste that into a Canvas discussion, which we then look at live in class. And this has really helped people sort of wrap their heads around because the question's kind of open ended in a sense. I explain this until I'm blue in the face, but until they actually try to do it, it's really hard for them to wrap their heads around it. And the AI gives me the ability to critique and say, okay, this is what ChatGPT got wrong, but here's the other problem. You're not really asking it the right question, or you need a question that's going to be more precise, and so on and so forth. And I can do this as an in class live fire exercise in a way that wasn't possible unless I went and did, okay, you need to write a draft and all this other jazz, which is a lot of work for me. And at the same time, is not necessarily a very effective communication method. I mean, putting a few comments on a paper, if you put enough comments on a paper to make it meaningful, they don't read it. If you put too little comments and you're too cryptic, they don't understand it. And so doing it that way is extremely difficult. The more you can have conversations about the student's work, the better you are off. The challenge there is logistics. If you've got 30 people in a class, how do you do that, right? And I have a number of strategies around that, but that's another conversation for another day. But I just wanted to point out that AI has made the problem definition or the question definition on the blogs easier because I can do that live. And that was the low-hanging fruit. The brainstorming was another one. But um so this is an actual blog for one of my classes. Um this is the third blog. So I'm asking the question again of how do I navigate something through, in this case, how do I navigate something? How do I get a bill passed through Congress, and what are ways in which it gets derailed? I mean, I'm not looking for the Schoolhouse Rock version of this. I'm looking for, okay, we put thousands of bills into Congress every year, but only a few hundred of them ever see the light of day at the other end for the president to even sign. Why is that? And how can you make sure yours is one of the lucky few, right? And these are the kind of questions that I want my students to sort of wrap their head around. Also, to know that you can't just snap your fingers and make a law. That also teaches that lesson as well. So I start out with a blog, and I do that very consciously, because to me, a blog is not that dissimilar from a paper. Um, format wise and all that sort of thing. It's basically, and in many ways, the rubric I use to score this emphasizes kind of the 5 paragraph essay, and I do that on purpose in part because, and there are problems with that, but I do that in part because I'm try to limit the number of new things I throw at them at any given time. But this falls into the yellow category. What can I do with help? And I spend a lot of time in class, not reading them, reading them things from the textbook, but helping them figure out how to write these blogs. Um, but it's still a struggle. And this is kind of pro forma, and people are just going to slap down things because they have to. Okay. Um, the next layer up on this, because the final portfolio in this class is an actual website that they own themselves. It is a tangible work product, which I think is an incredibly important part of the equation. But when I asked them to say, okay, look, no one's going to read a bunch of text on a website. You are the audience. Think of yourself as the audience. If you hit a website that is not have a bunch that has just all text, are you going to really sit there and read it? And of course, they all go, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm like, okay, so you need to figure out a way to communicate your message visually so that people will understand that. And that's a real leap for them. This also forces them to transform their thinking from not just a textual standpoint to a visual one. And this is kind of a sub theme of all of this as well. Um, this is something that freaks some of them out. They're not used to communicating this way. All they've ever done is written papers over and over again for their academic careers, and suddenly saying, "Okay, this is harder. This should be harder because how do you say this with a lot less, uh, a lot less uh, um, when you can't just sort of throw text at the problem, you know?" And how do you communicate this in a way that's succinct? It's harder to communicate things in a shorter, more succinct way than it is just to, write until you drop. Um, I've never really been satisfied with the outcomes on this because this takes them into the what I can't do. And they usually come up with a cop out good enough solution. And this is a reasonably good effort, but it still doesn't really tell me much. It's kind of a generic how a bill goes through Congress stuff. It doesn't really talk about, I like to see statistics here that talk about failure rates or, where bills fail and so on and so forth. And this data is out there if you're just willing to look long enough, but they're not. So, I've again just getting him to this point in the first place, just getting him to think visually. I consider that enough of a victory to be worthwhile. But at the same time, there's so much further they could go with this if they felt empowered to do that. So I had a revelation. I think revelation is probably too strong a word, but um, a few months ago, I was just sort of thinking about this as my students were doing this assignment. Remember that third assignment is, how does a bill go through Congress? And I try to force them to use the textbook and not just pull stuff off of Wikipedia. Um, and as I tell them, look, I'm giving you a pantry full of food. Do not run out to the grocery store to buy random ingredients for your paper. You should have pretty much everything you need. You may need a few odds and ends here and there, but you really ought to start with what's in the pantry instead of going to the grocery store. They don't necessarily want to hear that because to them, textbooks are evil. And I admit they're not great containers of information, but at least it's something I can control to a certain degree. And so this is um, my blog number blog number 3 assignment. So this actually involves a little bit of a demonstration. So I'm going to take the text. Now, this is our first little venture into Notebook LM. Excuse me while I navigate pages here. Um, I really hate sometimes how Zoom, uh, prioritizes pages. You have to sort of, hold on. The share window is something that needs to be somewhat upgraded from a human perspective. All right. So let me go over here and share. Okay. So I said, okay, what happens if I take Notebook LM, which is an AI that it's called a RAG, that allows me to control where that AI is pulling its information from. And I find this to be incredibly useful. And so would my students. So I have loaded the textbook and I use the OpenStax open source American government textbook, which is available in PDF form. I am very much an open educational resource advocate because I think textbooks are uh, one of the biggest problems that we have in terms of controlling costs for students and a big barrier for them. That's another conversation as well. But needless to say, my textbook, at least this one, is available on the public web as a PDF. So any one of my students can do exactly what I'm about to do right now. So I've loaded the textbook in, and I'm going to put the question, which I've basically copied and pasted from Canvas now, in there. And should come as no surprise or shock to you what's about to happen here. Give it a sec here. Okay, so here's your blog. And I would probably give this blog without reading it very carefully. They would probably check off all of the points on my rubric and get 100, with the exception of the graphics. They'd still have to fold a graphic in, but there's 90% of it. So what have I accomplished here in terms of what I'm asking the students to do versus what they can do? They can shortcut it, right? And they will. I used I I'm not naive about that. And so this breaks my third assignment. It doesn't break the other two as much, although you could still theoretically break them as well. Um, but the problem with the other two, and it's a little different from this one, is that process of translating into visual communication means you really have to understand what you're talking about. And I think this is still true here, but needless to say, that was a pretty easy way to write a 750 word blog. And given that easy out. Now, again, my students are not the most proficient when it comes to using these tools, but they will be. And the difference between doing this in Chat GPT versus, again, one of the reasons that, again, ways they get around that is by making them use the textbook. Well, if I can load the textbook into the AI, which is again going to become much more common, then that's a problem in terms of getting these things in terms of legitimacy. So let me go back to my presentation here real quick. All right. So I have a problem now with this assignment. And I've had some thoughts about what to do about it. And actually, that's part of why I want you guys to wanted you guys to share your Google login so you could explore this with me. But the reality is that I'm stuck within systems that are built around grading and testing by extension for their legitimacy. And grading is a big part of this problem because we're dealing in a meaningless currency with grades. And the students aren't going to derive any um, they aren't going to derive any benefit from uh, um, or any meaning from meaningless assignments. And the reality is, this technology has become increasingly out of sync with practice. Ivan Illich wrote this, 50 years ago, 50 plus years ago at this point. He wrote this in the early 70s. But this idea of school becoming a reason for its own existence, independent of teaching and learning, is something that's been a problem for a long time and one that we've largely ignored. So how do I get around this? Well, where are the advantages I like to call this augmented intelligence because I highly encourage you guys to look up Douglas Engelbart and Augmenting Human Intellect. It's one of my Bibles, so to speak, in terms of thinking how we should think about technology. So when I approach any new technology, I'm always looking for, okay, what does it help me do better than I could do before? So this, I've already talked about this, speed and being able to do live in class assessment of what the students are doing. Uh, Brainstorming perspective is much more efficient and effective, and it's more effective if you're doing it yourself than watching somebody else do it. And building context, which I think at this point, unfortunately, a lot of the AI platforms don't do as well as they should. But one of the things I'm personally working on in terms of my the entrepreneur side of my thing is a context building machine. Um, Not there yet, but stay tuned. Um, I mean, these are things that have immediate application, and I'm sure I haven't thought of all of them. So this is where the question of okay, so how can we use AI to beat AI in a sense? How can we use it ourselves to gain these advantages from its reality? And the short answer to that is why can't we make our own notebooks? And so what I've done here and the link that is in here, again, this won't work unless you have a login, but I'm going to share screen again. So you should hopefully be able to see it. Um, so in addition to, and I've been playing a lot with Notebook. One of the advantages that Notebook has is, again, I can load up any corpus of information. It's not getting random bits of information from the internet. And I find this an incredibly powerful tool, and I have different collections. It's still got some limitations. I can't just copy and paste these and share them in that way, um, and I can't. Um, uh, I can't. It's difficult, when it comes to using it with students, I would have to add everybody in the. Says we do not have access. Okay, hold on. I hit send. All right, my bad. All right, I thought I was getting ahead of the game, and apparently I'm not. Uh, Hold on. You can see this process now. I would not do this in the same way. Obviously, if I were doing this with a class, I would be uh, adding. I would do a session at the beginning where I would add everybody, or do it on my own time, and give everybody access, just like I do with Bureau and other tools. Um, Obviously. Eh. This is a very inefficient process. My apologies. All right. I hope this is something that Google will address in the uh, near future as far as um, the ability to share this like you would share any Google Doc. Um, I think they're probably worried about copyright issues because essentially I can put the contents of any book in here and then you can query it. But that's another disruptive thing that breaks. Okay, I thought it would automatically send. Sorry, I'm going through the chat here, looking, grabbing people's email addresses as we speak. Uh, and this is also the first time I've actually tried this in a live workshop environment. So you guys are my guinea pigs a little bit here too. So thank you and apologies at the same time. Oh, got a few other folks. Okay, so again, I'm not going to put any of the EDU guys' addresses in because it's got to be something that you use to access Gmail. And I've discovered that EDU, some institutions block you from doing that, which I think is idiotic, but I don't control their email servers. All right, one last one here, and then I'm going to press on. Okay. Send. Did it save everybody? Why will it not let me add any more people? Okay. Um, I don't know why every time I go to send, it doesn't send, but this is the problem with operating on the bleeding edge of stuff. But okay. And I'm going to do exactly what I just said. I wasn't going to uh, that I that one of the advantages of this are. But so Notebook LM has only been out for about I think about 4 to 6 months now. It came out last fall. I encourage you to. It's free to use, and I encourage you to do that. And if you're interested, I will figure out a. I'll figure out what's going on here. Um, but if I um, so I have a number of different pedagogical readings that I've got all plugged in here, stuff that I use implicitly or explicitly in my own pedagogical strategies. And I say, okay, give me an assessment strategy where Notebook LM could help me teach students higher level Bloom's taxonomy uh, skills. Okay. That's not a question mark thing, but whatever. And again, I apologize. I was hoping to be able to get everybody in here. Um, so it's given me a list of ideas. And again, these come from all of these readings. Okay. And I can control and I can also see where they're coming from. So takes me right there. Okay. So you can build your own database here, is my point. You know, take those articles, take all of those things that you have lying around in your virtual desk, and you will have to have, it does require PDFs, although it will go to most or some websites. But I can actually have it generate, you know, me a specific assessment assignment to teach one of these skills. Did I mention government class? But you can also do follow-up questions and so on and so forth. The point here is that if I could get this part to work, we could all be in there and you could all be asking your own questions and getting your own answers off of my corpus. That is a power that I did not have as a presenter until very recently. So how does this reshape? I know I'm looking at the time here and we're getting kind of close here. Um, and again, I'm happy to try to figure out how to give you access. I just don't want to stop everything cold. I'm hoping again that this is something that will evolve over time as far as the presentation slash workshop side of things is concerned. But I've also learned a valuable lesson today, which is something is keeping me from adding that many people at once. Um, so let's strip everything back again. Let's think about what exactly we're trying to assess here and engage in the same kind of critical thinking. And again, you can use an AI to start to strip back that question using, and again, I encourage you to use something like Notebook LM where you can control those inputs. Although even ChatGPT these days, you can get source material and maybe it finds something that you wouldn't otherwise have known about. You know, there's an advantage to both. And that's again a longer and other conversation. So, what does this mean for what does this mean for how we actually assess and teach? So let's go back to Vygotsky here. Um, I think that AI reduces the red zone and increases the yellow zone. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. This is an article from MIT. Um, and I did a short link for that. If you just do bit.ly/Vygotsky MIT, you should find your way there. There's also a QR code if you prefer to go that way. And they also talk about it in the context of ChatGPT. This article is from almost a year ago now. But, think about all the different ways you could explore a textbook as opposed to randomly asking people to read it and then not apply it very well. Um, so going back to this is kind of a replaceable assignment in a sense, especially once you get this far into the semester, because the students can generate these things directly out of a notebook LM. Even if I require them to use the textbook for that. Um, but can I make this part better? Can I change the thought processes where there's not simply looking for random graphics like a picture of the Capitol and a picture of the legislative process and just slapping things down and adding a few bullet points? That's not a very deep thinking process in some ways. And one that, again, my students really struggle with, and I struggle to teach because that narrative of visual storytelling is hard. But it's something that I think we're going to be at a premium going forward. We're going to have a whole different conversation about that. But so, what if I instead have them generate that blog, but instead make the assignment translating that blog into a flowchart or a game? This is actually a game that I developed to try to teach these very same concepts, and have them, turn it into something that they build themselves, and they could use any number of concept mapping softwares, many of which are free, to build this themselves, and then share the graphic or put the graphic on their website. Now, instead of taking someone else's graphic, they're building their own. And they're doing it out of something that they've had to generate and taking it to that next level. I'm not saying we should get rid of writing. I'm not saying we should get rid of blogs, but we have to think really carefully about what exactly we're asking people to do in the context of using that writing. But now AI might be able to give me that higher level. I will freely admit I have not tried this yet, but this is one of those suggestions that Notebook gave me, and I was like, okay, yeah. I mean, I do a lot of visual thinking anyway when it comes to the way I teach in class. I use Miro fairly heavily in class. Well, maybe instead of me creating these graphics, have them do it by themselves. So, this is an example of the kind of thinking, and it's not by any means exhaustive, but it might make sense for this particular assignment and working through the problem. So the final word here is, first of all, don't forget to use AI for your own superpower. Let it help you generate solutions to these seemingly insoluble problems. You might be surprised at what you come up with. One of the things that AI does, and I think it does it reasonably well, I want to make it better, but as a visual artist, as a photographer, um, the difference between a good photograph and a boring photograph is perspective. And the same thing is true when we're dealing with information and we're trying to figure things out. A lot of times we get really set in our information silos, and this is how you do testing, and this is how you do writing, et cetera, or this is how you do assessment in general. and we never step back and we never go, well, what if I completely rethink this whole thing? AI can help us explore what that looks like in a fairly safe environment in a sandbox. And then you can try these things out. But the other thing is, as you're doing that, you should be building sandboxes for your students to play in too, because you're learning about how to adapt your teaching and assessment methods. They're also learning whatever subject you're trying to teach them. It's the same process. And AI can be helpful in both of those. Um, Going back to Douglas Engelbart, again, that quote, we refer to a way of life in an integrated domain where hunches, cut and dry intangibles, and the human feel for a situation usefully exist with powerful concepts, streamlined technology and notation, sophisticated methods, and high powered electronic aids. Wrote this in 1962. It's very true today. Think about how you could use AI as a integrated domain where hunches can play out. So that's the extent of what I want to throw at you today. Any questions for the last? I think I have another roughly 10 minutes. And again, I apologize. I've got to figure out what's going on with that attempt to let you guys into that database. Thoughts, questions, or otherwise, you can feel free to. I think you can unmute. I don't. I think you have that power. Thank you, Rebecca. I always with these talks. Thank you, Yvette. I don't know if I've beaten the audience into stunned silence or yeah, no, visual communication isn't just fun, Michelle. It is absolutely central. I haven't really talked about that in a deep sort of way, but that is very much central to any discipline because the reality is the reason we've used text for the last 500 years is because it was technically the only thing we could do. And it has driven us a long way and it is incredibly useful. But text is a linear thing, and it is something that it requires a lot of learning and discipline in order to be able to master. One of my favorite quotes is from the guy who wrote The Martian. That he says, "Give a man a book, and he will amuse himself for an evening. Teach a man to write, and it will lead to a lifetime of self doubt." But the reality is our students live in a visual world. They live in a world of TikTok, at least until last week, YouTube, Instagram, et cetera, et cetera. And we teach them in a textual world, and we somehow expect them to be able to move seamlessly between the two. The other thing that people often forget is that, if you show a 3-year-old a picture, they'll figure it out. If you show a 3-year-old a book, and they don't know how to read yet, some 3-year-olds can read, it's meaningless to them, you know. And the reality is that's something that human beings are built with is this visual understanding of the world. And the more we can leverage but it's hard to communicate to learn, to use technology to create that way, but it's become a whole lot easier in the last 20 years. And AI is just the latest generation on that. I mean, one of the only reasons I actually pay for Chat GPT is because of Dolly and being able to create graphics on the fly. And I'm a photographer. I create pictures all the time, but I need this picture to show this idea. Um, Having an AI to do that has been useful. I've deliberately tried not to do that in this presentation, and making it hard on myself, but and you got to know when to turn the technology off. I'm not a full-throated, you must do this. I still have paper books. Um, and absolutely I've I don't know how many. I will say it's certainly hundreds, if not thousands of paper books littered around the house. My wife being the my wife being the limiting factor there. You can't fill the house with books like your parents did. But and there are times when that is great, but at the same time, some kinds of books I just want to get the information out of. So I've been playing with Notebook LM in terms of uploading books into it and then extracting information from them. So, but yeah, don't feel overwhelmed by it. Do what you need to do and see where it can help you do what you need to do better, and keep yourself wide, open up your horizons as you see fit, but also open up your don't be afraid of letting your imagination or letting AI's imagination take you into weird places. Um, that shouldn't be scary. Um, and it's not a war. And the second you start thinking of it as a war, as I said earlier, you can't win that one. It's over time, it's not a winnable thing. And every time we've tried to control information in human history, it hasn't ended well. Okay. Well, yes, absolutely. You have to play. Don't forget how to play, Penny. Good, very good point. Um, that's the key. I've always played with technology, and then that's how we discover new things. We play around. We play around with ideas, and if the technology helps me play around with ideas, which is really what I'm trying to do, and what I'm trying to help my students do, and we shouldn't be afraid of that. Play also involves failure, by the way. This is one of the things I get into with, and I'm a big game fan, but gamifying education, the failure has to be meaningful. But how do you do that, right? How do you, play involves risk. So, um, I don't think we need to get into late adopters and early adopters. I think you just jump in and what's the risk? What do you got to lose? The reality is your students are going to adopt these things at their own rate, whether you like it or not. And so you need to understand to a certain extent and use it to your advantage. I mean, again, think about how this can be gamed because unfortunately we are stuck in a system that is a game and it's a fairly meaningless game to a lot of students. And as anybody who tries to get people to think in their classes or read the textbook or read these readings, it'll make you a better person. I don't know about you guys, but most 98% of my students are very much um, resistant to that from day one. That was my big wake up call when I first started teaching. I thought I'm going to walk in the classroom and I'm going to tell them the way the world works and they're going to lap it up. Nope. It ain't how it worked out. So everything I've done ever since then, or almost everything, has been how do the teaching is a motivation battle. It's not a it's not about learning. If you win the motivation battle, the learning will take care of itself. And you've got to make it approachable and exciting for that reason. So, okay, well, it looks like we're out of time. So, yes, of course not. So, what do you do with it, right? So, in a lit class, how do you turn that around? Do you put, you know, do you have them explore Shakespeare in a completely different way by, say, putting his works into a notebook LM and then getting them to query it and then having discussions about what it says about the similarities between Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet or whatever, right? And then you invite, maybe you light that spark and then they go and read it themselves. And I've certainly had that experience myself as I've analyzed books. I'm like, oh, I really need to read this more carefully. And then I go back and reread it. But it sparked that curiosity as opposed to sitting on my bookshelf forever as on the, I'll get around to reading this eventually. So thanks, guys. I think I don't know. I suppose I should stop things. I don't know how. I haven't done the. I haven't done this in a way in which I was actually in control. Is there a survey? I don't know. I just sort of showed up and turned on Zoom and was told to let you people in, which is great. All right, guys. All right, take care. Have a great weekend, everyone. And I know some of y'all are in California, or most of y'all are in California, so hopefully you're not in fire zones. So we survived the snow here. All right, bye. Bye bye.